And so we had to try to wake them up. And then I did music like Elton John, which I have the piano right next to me. So I would sing things like, I remember when a rock was young, me and Susie had so much fun, la 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 la. And everybody would clap along and it was fun.
Okay, let's begin. Hi everybody, my name is Bobby Dsouza, author of the book Fallen to Rise, a musician, keynote speaker. Today I have the privilege of meeting a dear friend who I have connected recently, but I'm a big fan of his good work. He's delivered thousands of presentations over the last 2 decades. Jason is the world's only keynote speaker utilizing entertainment, musical impressions, and comedy to teach leaders how to capture their unique leadership promise and signature moves. He's a musician, I'm a musician. He uses music in his keynotes and I use a bit of music in my keynotes. So, that really intrigued me and that connected me. I sent him a LinkedIn connection and here we are. And I'm so glad. He has performed in every major casino in Las Vegas, one of the youngest inductees in the prestigious Speaker Hall of Fame, author of the acclaimed self-help book, The Promise to the One. Jason, welcome.
Bobby, great to be here with you. I think your listeners were probably confused that when it says that I'm the only speaker who utilizes music, but then it says impressions, because I'm sure they were like, wait a minute, Bobby's a music singing or a music entertaining speaker as well. So wait a minute, what is he talking about? But yeah, I do musical impressions and comedy mixed in, where you're doing mostly the drumming, right? Is that your main signature move, right?
Yes, the drumming, some bit of vocals. I also do impressions, but they are only limited not mainly to singers, but mainly to actors and superstars. Bollywood is a very big industry in India. You must have heard,
Oh yeah, cool. Okay, I didn't know you did the impressions. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to connect with you, and I admire what you've created for yourself, of your great career and with your family, and I'm really, really excited to chat with you.
Absolutely, Jason, and thank you so much for giving your time. And, to begin with, before I ask you a few questions, today, my focus is going to be on that book that is really very interesting, The Promise to the One.
Yeah.
But, before we talk about your book, love it, and that's an Everest, right? Right in the book, right? There's an Everest on the book.
It's a beautiful mountain on the front, yeah.
Yes. So before we actually talk about the book, and that's what we're going to discuss about, I have a question for you. Jason, the real raw version of you, if you could just give me a little summary of how did it begin, how did you start your career, something that you like to share that a lot of people may not know.
Well, sure. I'm sure they don't know. I started my career in Las Vegas, which is the home of entertainment. And while I was in Las Vegas, I found out that I could make people laugh. I could do music impressions and comedy mixed all together. And people wanted that. And so as a performer, I got on stage in front of people that were absolutely asleep on the front row. You would imagine that they would be excited to be there, but no, Las Vegas audiences are almost asleep. And so we had to try to wake them up. And then I did music like Elton John, which I have the piano right next to me. So I would sing things like, I remember when a rock was young, me and Susie had so much fun, la 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 la. And everybody would clap along and it was fun. I put together a show of musical impressions where I would go from one artist to another singing in their voices, and it became a popular hit. Eventually, I put together a speech on leadership to help leaders discover their signature moves, and I used the music that I do within that show into a leadership speech. So it's a very unique combination, and I'm doing mostly singers that people would know from around the world, like the Bee Gees from Australia, where they would sing up, I'm singing way high, I'm singing way high, ha, 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 that kind of thing. Or Louis Armstrong, some of the old legends. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. And so I would do all of those voices to teach a leader that they have a signature move that they need to share. And some people are like, well, I don't sing. And I say, no, that's not the point. The point is, you have your gifts. How do you share them with the world? And so it's become a fun way to teach leadership and strength and growth.
I got to actually, I don't know when I will get that opportunity, but I would love to be in your live show, specifically a keynote where I see, like in Hindi, we call it Mishran, or like a marination of music and keynote, just to see that. So, whenever there is an opportunity, I love to. But here is my question, you initially started more and brought in elements of humor and impressions. How did you suddenly decide that, you want to move from like humor and entertainment to getting into like more insightful, purpose-driven message, right? Because sometimes a lot of people may not want to listen to the second part, the keynotes.
Right. No question. Yeah, when I began my career as a speaker, people were like, no, we don't want you to speak. Just do the funny stuff, do the music and the impressions. So through the last decade or so, I've figured out how to make it so they don't know when I'm speaking and don't know when I'm entertaining, and I'm doing them all at the same time. So I melded them all together so that it feels like a constant flow, a story, a narrative. And I really brought that in, I would say about 10 years ago. It became my main thing. And I did that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I did that because my voice was starting to wear out. I was singing and doing shows all over the world, about 200 dates per year.
Wow.
Which is a lot. And I was hurting my voice. So I had to back off on that. And I also had some people at some of my gigs say to me, hey, you're teaching leadership within your show. Do you realize that? And so I started to lean into that a little bit more. And the more that I did it, the better it seemed to get. And I'll tell you something else, Bobby, that most people don't realize. The person who does the show at 9 o'clock at night gets paid way less than the person who does the leadership speech at 9 in the morning. And that for me was such an incongruence that I said, well, I have to add something from this show at 9 at night to the 9 a.m. presentation. And I got paid probably quadruple what I was making as an entertainer, and I'd always get a standing ovation as the entertainer at night. And I would see leadership speakers making 5 or 6 times more than me, not even get a standing ovation or make anyone laugh. And so I thought, well, what if I did them all together into one? It's been very successful.
Wonderful. That is a wonderful journey, Jason. And I think the whole process of you discovering a number of things, one about you, but then in the process, experimenting. And I've realized one thing that, as speakers, I think, as we start on the journey and we keep trying new things, we start experimenting. And, we start discovering ourselves. And I think that's beautiful in a way, right? And, there's one thing that you said, which I think resonates with me, is you said, some people from the audience actually said, did you realize that you are actually teaching on leadership? And I remember, when I used to deliver my keynotes, even before I became a motivational speaker, and I used to do these workshops for people, and I used to not talk on motivation, resilience, and stuff like that. And one day when I was traveling with a dear friend who was a fellow, facilitator with me in a workshop, he traveled back with me in his car and he said, Bob, did you realize one thing? I said, what is that? He said, every time you speak about inspiration, you light up. There is this energy, there is excitement, it comes naturally to you and people want to listen. And while I was traveling in the car with him, I said, okay. So is this possibly something that I should be doing? I knew it somehow, but sometimes those affirmations help. So, I think that connects with me because sometimes, we could say that we are very talented, we are very good at something, but I think, affirmations also from people who may not know us, I think helps to, in other words, give us a stamp, or clarity as to, what we want to do.
I love your friend that did that for you. That's a wonderful thing. And so are you saying that you were doing speeches without the entertainment at first, or were you doing entertainment and then added in the motivation and inspiration? How did it go for you?
So initially, I did not do the entertainment part at all. Neither did I even do keynotes. I used to just facilitate workshops for smaller group of people, 20 people, 30 people, 40 people. In fact, when I started and I aspired to facilitate programs, I used to do it just for my nephew and niece. who were 3 years old and 5 years old. And but while I was doing the workshop, this person came to me and told me you should do keynotes around this, and then I started doing that. But in the process of that, in the social gathering, I was always a drummer since I was a little child, and I used to always play. Then I said, oh, can I bring this in? And I brought in an African drum, and then I said, oh, interesting, can I get something which it does not limit me only to the beat of the drum? Can I add something else? So I got an electronic drum, which is like 1,000 instrument sounds in one. And, I started experimenting. So it's an interesting thing, and I think I'm still experimenting, and every audience is so different. I think you would agree, Jason, right? Every audience, you could have the same material, but the reactions are different. Would you agree?
I agree. And I love that you have implemented into your speaking that was already working something that most people wouldn't think to add into a speech. Most people would never think drumming would make sense in a motivational environment, but yet it brings the audience together. It connects the mind and the heart in a place that they perhaps haven't seen from another speaker. So congratulations to you. And yes, experimenting and bringing in your different gifts and talents. That's what makes speaking so awesome. There are no rules.
Yes.
Just enjoy yourself.
Yeah. And I think you used a word called gifts. And I so agree with you. Finally, we could say that we are very talented, but finally it's a grace, right? That you have the gift that's been given to you in a way. And how can you, just blossom it and make it more abundant? And how can you start impacting so many people's life through music and then inspiration? So wonderful.
And it is a gift. Yeah, you have a gift, as do I, as does everyone that's watching or listening to your podcast. Everyone has a gift, if not many gifts.
Yes.
And if we don't share them, I believe that we're cheating the world of that which only we can do.
Beautiful.
So you must share your gifts.
Love that. Love that. Now, here was one question that I had for you. The book, The Promise to the One, why did you actually write it? Who is it about? And what is the core message that you want to bring from that?
So a lot of people are not quite sure who the one would be in the promise to the one. But if I were to say, who's a promise you make to in your work? You would say, oh, my clients or my customers. That's my promise I make to them. And then what about your promise on your team? Well, I make promise to my coworkers that I'll follow through with the job, or a promise to my family. Well, who's left? The promise to the one is the promise to yourself. And so what promises are you making or possibly breaking that only you know about? The greater promises that you make and keep to yourself, the greater you'll be in your work, in your family, in everything in your life. And so that's why I wrote this book first. There will be other versions of it, like the promise to the family, the promise to the customer, etc. But the promise to the one is you.
Interesting. The promise to the one is you. And I think it's an interesting thing. So if you're going to get versions of part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, it's good to start with part 1 with you, right? Because there is this famous quote, we've all heard about it, that we're trying to change the world. Let's begin with. And that's the most toughest thing, right? We've, regardless of how much wonderful speeches we can give on stage, but, just keeping that promise is something which is not very easy. When we talk about keeping promise to the one, what should somebody do in a situation where people are demanding that you make a commitment, you make that promise to me and do this, and just to keep the peace, you say, I will do it, but then is not able to do it? What do you suggest this person should do? Because anyways, at the end of it, is not going to keep the promise.
Right. Now, that's a great question. And I would say, if somebody's forcing you into a promise, it's time to figure out your own personal promise of boundaries and what you're willing to do or not to do. Now, let me give you an example. When I was becoming very well known and liked in Las Vegas at the beginning of my career, I was in my early 20s, and I was being offered a lot of money and a lot of opportunities. But they wanted me to take my show, which I had created for families, my family pictures behind me. Family was most important to me. I wanted it to be a show that all families and children and grandparents could all come to together. But the Las Vegas casinos wanted me to make it only for adults. And that means humor, music, things that were not family friendly or something that the whole family could enjoy. And so they were trying to force me into making a promise to them that I would make a show for that. Now, I had to walk away from that opportunity because it didn't align with my own promise for myself. And so that's a way to establish a boundary to say, I have my promises I make for myself before I'll make one and keep one with you. And yet, if there are times where you are forced into making and keeping a promise, it's good to discuss the expectations up front. To say something like, well, when would this be due? Or what are the expectations you have of me making and keeping this promise? If we can agree upon that, then I can make this promise. Or we can change the words and we can make it a goal. I could set a goal to maybe hit it. And if I don't, that's okay. We'll just try again. But if I make a promise, I have to keep it. And that's why I say, why set a goal when you can make a promise? Because if you set a goal and you just miss it, you set another one. But if you make a promise and you break it, that's a one and done. So your promises are your proclamations. Your goals are the particulars that can get you there. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And it's interesting that in case you feel that you're not very sure whether you can do it, so then you communicate to them and tell them that, rather than saying, let's keep a promise because, that will bind me, you could say, that's a goal that we are trying to achieve. If I miss it, I'll try it again. But when I say a promise, I will actually keep it. What I think I loved about what you shared, and I think it's really connected to the element of character, the whole element of character, right? Because you spoke about it at the start, is you setting your own boundaries. But before you make promises to others, I think you going back to your own self and asking yourself this one powerful question, that what are the promises that I want to keep to myself? Will I honor that commitment to myself? And I think when our radar, is very, very clear, we know what we can do, what we will not do, then it is so much more easier to say yes or no to people's promises. And you gave a wonderful example, how you actually kept your word. I know financially it must have impacted you. Business-wise, it must have impacted you. But I think that's character, I think. So much.
Yeah, it impacted us greatly. And my wife really was excited about the money and the fame we were going to have with me as a headliner on a Las Vegas stage. This was going to be my moment. I was going to be on top of taxis and buses and billboards and have the show and the dancers and all the stuff that makes a Las Vegas show. And I said, someday we'll have children. Will they be able to come to this show? And if they can't, then I can't do it. And so I walked away from the opportunity of a lifetime, the money of a lifetime, and created something better. And I believe that I've been blessed for doing that.
Wow. Something to learn for sure. Absolutely. It takes a lot of dare. I think there's a whole element of inner security, I believe. There is this whole sense of, number one, I think, what I'm doing right now, I'm communicating to myself and I'm communicating loudly, but I think it's like a reflection when you shared that. I think number one, it comes from a deep sense of trust. That even if this opportunity goes away because I took a stand, I made the promise to the one. Even if this goes, I trust, like Louis Hay says, I trust the process of life. I'm safe. It will all work out. And at the end of it, I think there is this deep trust you have in your own self, in how things are going to work out. And then, you're able to keep that promise. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
I love that, Bobby. That's a very well said. And what I appreciate about you, and your listeners and viewers do as well, is that you've made that promise for yourself. And that's why you've created the career and life that you have. Yes. And there are so many people that dream about it and talk about it and never go for it. And it has to come from a very strong place of trust in self and of dare, just like you said. To dare yourself to dream, to create, to work hard. I know how hard a guy like you has to work because I've been doing it. It's connection, it's reaching out, it's long hours. There's a whole lot that goes into it that even your family has to start to understand. Oh, this is what this is what my husband or my dad or my wife or my friend has to do in order to survive. And yet, think about it. If you're listening or watching this podcast, what are the promises that you can make to yourself that say, I want to step into this place of doing something unique with my life that everyone else talks about, but I'm going to now live it and do it? That's the difference.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. Now, we're talking about your book and about the promise to the one. There are so many messages that, I think, Jason, you could have brought. You could bring message on energy, message on building self-motivation, resilience. There's so many things that you could talk about. My question is, out of so many messages, why would you prefer to talk about the promise in your speech? And I, in fact, have heard your entire keynote, in colleges and campuses, and I've loved it. My question is, why did you choose the promise? Is there a particular reason?
I love that question, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. So I, for years, worked on speeches that were based around talents and gifts, that I believe that everybody has their talents and gifts, and we need to use them. And I created a speech called Signature Moves. And so I talk about the signature moves of a music artist, or the signature song that you love about them. And even like the signature move of a brand, a brand promise. And it started to come out from that to say, every performer that takes the stage makes a promise, whether they believe it or not, that they're going to keep the promise to an audience that's watching them. And I came up with something called the 3 commitments originally. And the 3 commitments sounded nice, but then I was speaking with a fellow speaker and peer who's a mentor of mine. And he said, you know what? The 3 commitments is nice, but you're the promise guy. And I said, what do you mean I'm the promise guy? He said, I don't know if I've ever seen anybody that stood for more challenging things and walked away from more opportunities than you. You're the promise guy. And I was like, I like that word. And I dug into the internet and found that not very many people talked about promises or saying what their word was and that they would do it. And obviously, that was hard to be able to brand around promise, because companies don't want to claim they have a promise. And yet, over the last decade, it started to catch on, where you'll go into a company, into a hotel, and it'll say, our brand promise, or our health promise, or our promise to our customer. I like that, because in the past it would have said, our goals are this, and it would list out 10 things. Now it says, here's our one promise proclamation, and that's what I teach.
That's powerful, actually. And it is so true. You gave an example of a hotel, a resort that we travel to. In my keynotes, I always talk about this, that you could have the biggest superstar, who might be on the television talking about your brand, about your product, about your service, because they're paid tons and millions of dollars or rupees. But the reality is, and even there could be a mission statement, which is put on the website. There is a promise put at the entrance of the reception. But finally, is every employee, every manager, every leader, in every transaction, in every conversation, in every interaction, in every body language that we show, are we actually keeping the promise? And I think that is not easy, right, Jason?
No, that's not easy. And that's why you need to make sure that your promise that you make is the right one.
So true.
Don't make a promise you can't keep, but push yourself. And so my overarching promise as a person is that I'm going to spread joy wherever I go. That's a very simple commitment, right? But it's hard when somebody throws a rock through the window of my car. Like that's a hard thing. So can I still spread joy in that moment? What does joy look like when I wake up with a headache, or I don't feel like being happy that day, or a customer calls and complains, or a social media post is negatively received? Can I still spread joy? That's been my overarching promise to myself, that is a practice. And to be candid, Bobby, there are days that I don't do it well. And part of the promise is to forgive yourself and start again the next day.
Interesting. So true. Sometimes we beat ourselves up, right? Specifically people who are passionate, ambitious, who've got a list of things that they promise themselves, I'm going to do this today. And when we don't keep it, half the time, the whole element of guilt can come in. But I think very wonderfully shared, I think it's important to heal yourself by forgiving yourself. And that's a promise you got to make to yourself.
Yeah. And that's why I talk about the importance of writing in a journal. And writing how your day went yesterday and what promises did you make and keep and how well it went. And if some didn't happen, what are the promises you can keep, or can you shift them into a goal that you're going to shoot for? It's very much like having, I don't know if you ever put together a to-do list, but if you put a to-do list together, you have all these lists of things. Rather, if I have an appointment with Bobby for a podcast at a certain time, I'm going to be there. That's a promise.
Simple as that. You say something, you do it. And if you cannot do it, you ensure that we communicate it. I think we've seen with working with so many vendors, the electrician that we work with and this and that. And then people say, I'm going to come. And then they completely ghost you. And then you're waiting and you're calling them. And what I've realized with myself is I'm the one who, even if somebody else is giving me the service, I'm the one paying them. I'm realizing I'm calling them and they aren't coming. So true. Keeping the promise, I think it's an everyday thing that happens. In Hindi, we call it rozmarra, the routine. Every day it happens, right? That promises are kept and promises are broken. Just one question. A number of times mentioned something about your signature move. Can you give us like an example or a story of how an ordinary individual, somebody who's a professional working within an organization, somebody who's an employee, how can they actually identify what is their signature move and how can they actually use it?
That's a great question too. Thank you. I would say, because I'm the president of it's a fairly large organization of a health supplement called Cardio Miracle. Within this organization, we bring on people that are all uniquely talented. And what we've done is we take them through what I call the ICM process. I stands for identify, C for clarify, M, magnify. Identify, clarify, magnify. The words rhyme, easy to remember. And so I ask everybody that we bring on into the company, I say, will you identify for me what you think your gifts and talents are? What are you good at? What can you bring to us that will make you unique and stand out? And what's interesting, Bobby, that happens is that they'll identify a whole list of things. And then we'll get clarity, or we'll clarify with either their coworkers or the past people that we have referenced to make sure that we brought them in. We'll find out what their talents are in their opinion from another source. And then I will bring it back to the employee and I'll say, okay, these people clarified what you didn't identify. And they clarified that you're great at this particular thing. For example, I brought on somebody who is supposed to be a great salesperson. That's how they identified that they're like, I'm great at sales. I said, awesome. I went back into their LinkedIn profile. I researched them online. I called the references. And I found out they're not as good at sales as they think. They're actually really good at data analytics to be able to be good at marketing. And that's how they've driven their sales. And so I said, okay, instead of being a salesperson knocking on doors all day and making phone calls, what if you did the data analytics we clarified and you become the marketing person for us? Now, they can magnify that. So they've identified their talents, they've clarified it with us, and now they can magnify their signature moves. Doesn't mean that they can't do what they identified. They're doing even better because we clarified what they can now magnify. So if you're sitting there wondering, how can I be more valuable in my work? Identify your gifts, clarify it with people you trust, whether it's asking your coworkers or your spouse or people that are your friends, just like you did, Bobby. You're in your car with your friend. He goes, you're good at this. And you're like, oh, you're right. he clarified for you what you'd yet to identify, and now you magnify it as one of the unique distinguishing features of you as a speaker and performer.
So identify, clarify, magnify. Wonderful. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be sitting down with myself, and I'm going to actually work on that a little more, because I think that's interesting. That's interesting. Jason, here's my question. People who are listening to you right now, how can they actually keep better promises to themselves, to their family, and to their work? What would you recommend?
I would say sit down with a pad of paper and a pencil or a pen. I believe that it's better to do that than on your phone or a laptop or a computer, because there's something between the mind and the body having a pen in your hand. It's a cognitive congruence by writing something on a paper.
Yes.
And it feels more solidified. It feels more permanent. And so write down what your promises could be and say to yourself, what are my promises to me? Maybe my one promise per day is I'm going to eat healthy all day. What does that look like? Then you could set little goals and say, well, I'm not going to eat bad sugars, or I won't eat out too much today. I'll make the food at home. Those types of small little goals that lead to the promise of saying, I will eat healthy. And then the promise to the family. What does that look like? Recently, I read a book on kindness, and I thought, how can I be kinder to my children? Even though I'm already very kind, I pay for everything, I'm always there for them. Well, I realized if I just send my kids a text throughout the day that tells them how great they are, that really makes their day. And so I've made a new promise to say I'm going to send a text to my kids to tell them how much I love them each day, and to my wife. And I'm telling you, I already thought that they knew that, but I guess the text helps too.
Yeah.
And so those types of things are small promises that add up to a lot that can make a big difference. So sit down with yourself, write out your promises, and there you might come up with a list of 10. Don't make 10 promises, make one and do it. The rest can be a goal that you'll set that you can utilize in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. Truly helpful, very insightful. If people want to check out your book, and if people want to buy this, or any sources where they can learn from you, if they want to connect with you, where do they connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. If they go to Amazon, that's where you would get The Promise to the One. If you enjoyed my voice for some special reason and want to hear me perform the book, that's on Audible. So you can listen to me reading the stories to you, which is fun. And I also do the voices mixed in. So that's kind of a fun piece. And then my website is jasonhewlett.com. And that's Jason Hewlett, Hewlett. And then LinkedIn, that's where you and I connected. And I'm on LinkedIn whenever I can be to do some professional business things. What I would love to tell your people about is if they wanted to go to jasonhewlett.com/ICM, they can get a assessment form for the ICM process. And it takes them through how to do that. So jasonhewlett.com/ICM.
Wonderful. Such a pleasure speaking with you, Jason. Thank you for sharing the insights. So much to learn from you. And thank you so much for your valuable time. And thank you once again.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate your good work, Bobby. You're a blessing to me, and I'm excited to be a part of your world.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. Thank you.